Hi, my name is Bethany Yeiser. I serve as president of the CURESZ Foundation. CURESZ stands for Comprehensive Understanding via Research and Education in Schizophrenia. We do education, research, and advocacy. And it is my pleasure today to be here with Dr. Henry Nasrallah, who is a faculty member at the University of Cincinnati in psychiatry, neurology, and neuroscience, and is also a founding CURESZ board member. So very happy to have you today, Dr. Nasrallah. We'd like today to discuss unmet needs in schizophrenia. What are the most urgent unmet needs?
Well, there are a lot of unmet needs, Bethany. Fortunately, we made a lot of progress over the last few decades in understanding the biology and treatment of schizophrenia, but there remains quite a lot of unmet needs. And I'm going to mention a bunch of them right now, and interrupt me as you wish. First, we have antipsychotic medications that really can treat delusions and hallucinations, which are the psychotic symptoms, pretty well. But schizophrenia is not just psychotic symptoms. There are what we call negative symptoms and cognitive deficits. And let me explain them quickly for the viewers. Negative symptoms include withdrawal, social withdrawal, flat facial expression, poor thinking, very kind of short sentences, and basically inability to relate to other people and lack of pleasure, and also lack of motivation and apathy. So these can be pretty impairing for people who needs to work. So we have no treatment for that yet, as of today. Many companies have tried and failed.
But to treat the negative
symptoms. Now, cognitive deficits is the other symptom domain, we call it, where the brain of the patient doesn't work very well across several cognitive functions, including memory, short-term memory especially, attention, processing speed, which means being able to process things normally, very slower, and then executive function, which is the frontal lobe here, planning ahead, making decisions, learning from mistakes and not repeating them. Those are still untreatable as well. So that's why our patients get rid of the delusions, hallucinations, but many of them still are unable to function or work. Some do, some don't, because of the negative and cognitive deficit. These are two huge unmet needs in schizophrenia.
So is there much research being done to develop treatments, to develop medications for these symptom domains?
Yes. Several drug companies, and I've collaborated with some of them with different mechanisms based on biology, neurobiology research. Unfortunately, we still don't have any approved. They do FDA studies and they don't beat placebo. So we call it a failed trial. So, but they're never giving up. Companies are still trying. The only people who develop drugs for psychiatry are drug companies. So we appreciate what they do. And they spend millions and hundreds of millions of dollars to develop drugs like that. I hope one day we will have a medication for each of those.
Looking back at my own schizophrenia, I really felt that an unmet need was education. I remember leaving the hospital thinking, nothing's wrong with me. I'm strong. I don't need this medication. I didn't have the education to know that if I went off my antipsychotic medication, I was going to relapse. I was going to be right where I started before I was ever hospitalized.
And that leads me to the next unmet need, which is treatment resistance. There are patients who just do not respond to the existing antipsychotics at all. Their delusions, hallucinations continue. You kind of experience some of that yourself. Your hallucinations never went away. We call them treatment resistant. And fortunately, we have a wonderful drug called clozapine, which is the only drug approved by the FDA for this condition. And so, you took clozapine now for, I don't know how many years?
17.
17 years, you're doing great, okay? So that's great. But 50% of people who don't respond to antipsychotics also don't respond to clozapine. So there's another category of patients. Schizophrenia is very heterogeneous. There are like several hundred types of schizophrenia. So no wonder some of them respond to regular antipsychotics, some of them respond to clozapine, and then that's a big unmet need. We need to find a medication that works for people who don't respond to clozapine. They're really the worst of the worst. But we have a lot of trials, like ECT works for those patients. Electroconvulsive therapy, what people call shock treatments, can actually help some of them. There are medications that have been reported to help, but we still don't have really a definitive treatment. We also have a huge number of what we call comorbidities. Patients with schizophrenia have substance use, a lot of substance use and have other psychiatric disorders and have medical conditions. We need to find treatments for patients who are abusing marijuana,
Marijuana especially.
alcohol, cocaine, mushrooms, etc. 70% of our patients have a positive urine screen, and that can worsen their condition. And we still don't have like an ideal way to treat both schizophrenia and the drug abuse. Then you have the psychiatric comorbidities. Very few patients have just schizophrenia. Many of them have anxiety, and have depression, they have ADHD, they have bipolar symptoms, they have alcoholism, etc., and OCD. So those are patients that like dual jeopardy, double jeopardy. We need to treat both the schizophrenia and the comorbid conditions.
Thank you, Dr. Nasrallah.
Sure. Now, one thing that also we've discovered over the last 20 years is that every psychotic episode is actually destructive to the brain. It kills hundreds of millions of brain cells. So it's very, very bad to let patients relapse again and again. We'll talk about that later in another context about why patients don't take their medication and end up relapsing. But what I'm driving on here is the unmet need of repairing the brain. So they lose tissue in the white matter, the gray matter, throughout the cortex, and we need to discover ways to replenish the brain, to let them regrow the parts of the brain that were lost. And we still don't have that yet, but the second generation antipsychotics compared to the older antipsychotics actually do have some beneficial effects. The first generation actually kill brain cells. We didn't know that until recently.
Wow.
Drugs like haloperidol actually kills brain cells. Even though it works very well on the delusions, hallucinations, it also destroys brain cells. And second generations, there are 11 of them now in the last 30 years. They don't do that. In fact, they're anti-inflammatory. They increase production of brain cells. They increase the nerve growth factor. They increase brain-derived neurotropic factor. They prevent ischemia from stroke. So they have many benefits, but not restore the entire cerebral integrity.
So, Dr. Nasrallah, back to cognition as an unmet need. How do we measure cognition deficits in patients with schizophrenia?
There are actually many measures for cognition, and they are basic. It's called neurocognitive testing, and it's a paper and pencil and words. And
Many hours, I imagine.
They can take several hours. Yeah, the longest one takes several hours, but there are some that are administered within maybe 15 minutes. However, there has never been a cognitive test filled by the patient themselves. So
Until you developed one.
I developed one, and it's a part of the CURESZ Foundation, actually. It's called Cognition Self-Assessment Rating Scale, and it's 12 questions. It's online, and the patient describes whether they can or cannot do a certain function. This relates to the cognition, and then those 12 answers are immediately calculated, and patient gets an email within a minute telling them, you don't have cognitive deficits, you have mild cognitive deficits, you have moderately severe or very severe, and you better have the full battery at that point.
You can also find the C-SARS at c-sars.org.
Now, just a couple more things I'll mention. There's a lot of evidence that the blood-brain barrier, this is a barrier that prevents things coming from the blood into the brain. That's how we protect the brain from all the junk in the body. It turns out that this barrier is impaired in schizophrenia. And that might explain why the patients with schizophrenia get inflammation. The brain is inflamed because some of the inflammatory biomarkers in the blood is going through the imperfect fence, as to speak. So we need to find a way to repair the blood-brain barrier to protect patients. And another organ that's very important are the mitochondria. Mitochondria is the engine that makes ATP, the energy that keeps all our body, working, and especially the brain. The brain consumes 20% of all the energy produced by the mitochondria. It turns out the mitochondria are also abnormal in schizophrenia.
Oh.
There's quite a few abnormalities, and that they produce free radicals that also can destroy brain cells. So we need to fix the mitochondria. It's not as easy as it sounds. The mitochondria are found in every cell in the body, and it has its own genetics, like 37 genes. So different than the regular genes. We have 23,000 genes in our genome. These mitochondria have their own genes, and they interact with the other genes. So that is another unmet need. It requires research. We need more funding to do research in order to solve the problem of schizophrenia, this major disorder, which costs a lot of money, by the way. You and I were talking about this the other day, and it's about $350 billion every year. Every year, schizophrenia patients cost this country $350 billion. So
And that's a number of expenses from lost employment,
direct and indirect, yes.
direct and indirect
Hospital-
caregivers,
yeah, hospitalization, medication, emergency room visits, forensic costs when they get in trouble with the law and they have to go to court, destruction of property, but then collecting disability,
yeah.
food, shelter, and disability. When you add them together, it's 350 billion. Imagine if we can solve schizophrenia, how much money we can save and basically invest it in other health programs.
Thank you, Dr. Nasrallah.
A pleasure. I think this is an important topic, and I'm glad that you asked me those questions.